unmute themselves until we want questions. That might help.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so I will kick us off and then I'll hand it over to Ziba, who will introduce our speakers and be our moderator. So thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Jonathan Cohen. I chair the Issues Committee here at Progressive Mass. If you've got emails about this event, you probably saw my name on them. As people who've been actively following issues around redistricting or kind of Massachusetts politics know, the state recently released proposed maps for the Massachusetts State Senate and Massachusetts State House. And those maps, if passed in whatever form, will be the maps that we have for the next decade here in Massachusetts. As a quick refresher, after the decennial US Census, that's when our state legislative districts, our congressional districts, and then and not too long as well, city council districts are all redrawn, and they can be redrawn in ways that empower the diversity of the state or not. And they can kind of empower kind of immigrant communities, working class communities, BIPOC communities or not. And so what we're going to be discussing here tonight is, what do we need to know about the maps proposed? How well do they reflect the advocacy that had gone in? What changes could and should be made, and what question, and how do we even understand the redistricting process itself, and what does it mean? So that was my kind of short overview. Thank you again to everybody here, and I will hand it over to Ziba.
Thanks, John. Welcome, everybody. I am Ziba Cranmer. I'm a member of the Issues and Elections Committees of Progressive Mass, and I'm a co-chair of the Elections Committee for the JP Progressives chapter. We're excited to welcome our panelists tonight. We've got Jordan Berg Powers from Mass Alliance, Beth Wang from Massachusetts Voter Table, Roberto Jiménez from the BTU, and they're all members of the Drawing Democracy Coalition. And we also have Tanisha Sullivan from the NAACP Boston branch. Since they are all pretty well-known folks, we're not gonna go into bios. We can jump into the content, but I am gonna put their bios in the chat in case anybody isn't familiar or wants to know more about them. And you can look in your leisure. So I just posted that in chat. So as John said, we're here to talk about redistricting tonight. As I think many of you probably were at a session we had earlier in the year. I was trying to remember when it was, the COVID times is sort of a black hole, but we had an outline. It was pretty much, I think, at the beginning of the process. Now we're at the end of the process. And as John said, hot off the press, we have the maps from the state legislature, it's redistricting committee, and another bunch of pressing deadlines coming up. So it's really great timing. And thanks to all of you guys on the panel for making time, given everything that's going on. So as John said, we're going to start with a refresher on the process by the amazing Beth Wang, who somehow managed to run the Boston Marathon while leading this coalition, which is just unfathomable to me. And then we're going to hear from each of the panelists on their reactions, as John said, and the assessment of the process itself, which we all know is pretty flawed from the beginning for so many reasons, including just the disaster of the census and the delayed release of the data. And that's all playing into the experience we're having, which I hope is an unusual one for the future. And but we're not going to spend too much time kind of on the census and that piece, but I just wanted to acknowledge it just because we want to get to your questions, into the action items, because it really is time for advocacy right now. We have a super short window for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth, who is going to provide an overview of the Drawing Democracy Coalition and the process that they have led as the anchor institution with so many partners around that. So Beth, over to you.
Awesome, amazing. Really, you all could not have found a better time to do this event. Literally of every week in the entire calendar, this is literally the best week to do this. So kudos to whoever thought to do this event this week. Great job in predicting exactly when the legislative maps were going to come out. And so I'm going to do a really quick and dirty overview of redistricting. So redistricting is the process of redrawing electoral district boundaries. We do this every 10 years after the decennial census. So I hope everyone here got their census in mid-March of 2020 when we all thought the world was ending, and that was actually kind of true. Filled out your census and then were counted in your community. And we do this because there's such rapid population growth in some places, and also there's population decline in others. We want to make sure that electoral districts are about the same population size. This is based on the principle of one person, one vote, which is in the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So I wanted to share just a little bit of important terminology because you'll probably hear these terms a couple of times. So the first is total population. By total population, we mean every resident who is counted in the 2020 census. Doesn't matter if they're a citizen or not, doesn't matter what age they are, total population is just everyone who is counted in the 2020 census. Our state constitution says that we're supposed to draw districts based off of total population. The next piece of terminology is voting age population, which we sometimes call VAP, V-A-P. That means all residents who were counted in the 2020 census and are over the age of 18. So if you remember filling out the census, you definitely filled out your date of your year of birth. So VAP is based off of the census count of people over the age of 18. The third important piece of terminology is called citizen voting age population. This is CVAP. This is, you can think of this as who is an eligible voter. This is an estimate. So these first two are counts. Citizen voting age population is an estimate. So it's an estimate of citizens over the age of 18 that's based on the American Community Survey, which is a survey, not a head count. So those are three important pieces of terminology that have probably been litigated to death. And we will definitely talk about these things. So you can think of total population as being the largest set of people. Then when we narrow to people over the age of 18, then we narrow it a little bit more by age, and then citizen voting age population is narrowed even further to only citizens who are over 18, and those are voters. So those are three important pieces of terminology that have big implications for the 2021 maps. I wanted to review just a few more other important terms. So a majority minority district is a district that has a 50% plus one racial or linguistic minority population. These majority minority districts are protected by the Voting Rights Act. That's a historic piece of legislation that passed in 1965. And the majority minority districts are intended to make sure that minority groups, usually racial minority groups, who have been historically excluded from the political process and political power, have the ability to elect candidates of their choice. And so in 2011, the Drawing Democracy Coalition pushed for the creation of the first majority minority congressional district. I know Jordan, Berg Powers, Rasan Hall, and many others were part of this process. And so in 2011, the legislature picked up this suggestion, drew CD7, and by 2018, Ayanna Pressley, probably the most compelling politician in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, was finally elected. So I think that's all to say is we can draw these districts, but sometimes it takes a while for the right candidate to come along at the right time. So redistricting is very important, but it takes a whole lot of base building and electoral experience in order for someone even as talented as Ayanna Pressley to get elected. Two related strategies for gaining greater representation include coalition districts. So this is where these are districts where the combined racial minorities, so it could be Black and Latinx people, it could be Black and Asian people, it could be Latinx and Asian people. This is where the combined racial minorities make up 50% plus one of the citizen voting age population, again, eligible voters. And then there are also influence districts where the people of color don't quite make up 50%, but might make up enough to substantially influence the decisions of an elected representative. So I often think of Boston City Councilor Ed Flynn, who literally puts out all of his social media first in English and then quote tweets it in Spanish and then quote tweets it in Chinese, right? It's very clear to me that there are some Latinx people in his district and some Chinese people in his district who don't make up a majority, but he definitely needs to do a lot to pander to those constituencies. I think of that as an influence district. And then there are a couple of criteria for drawing majority minority districts. These are based off of a lawsuit called Gingles. These are called the Gingles factors. These are the core criteria for a majority minority district. These are the legal criteria. This is not the same as political decision making, so that's an important distinction. So the first is that the minority group has to be sufficiently large, has to make up a 50% plus one majority. The minority group has to be politically cohesive. So that means Black voters vote with other Black voters, Latinx voters vote with other Latinx voters, Asian voters vote with other Asian voters. If anyone looked at the Boston preliminary map, you know that there is a lot of political cohesion by race. The next piece is that the white majority votes together to defeat the minority preferred candidates. And then the fourth factor is, like, in general, the minority group has less opportunity to access political power. That fourth factor is, like, almost always true in Massachusetts. I can't really think of a time when it's not true. And then one other piece is there are two ways that minority vote dilution happens. This is illegal. There's cracking, so that this spreads minority voters into small enough portions such that they aren't a majority anywhere. So you'll see that there are 6 red dots, 6 teal dots, and here we have 2-to-1 teal to red districts. And then there's also packing, which is putting many minority voters in a single district when they could control more. So here we have 3 red dots, and so we have only 1 red district, but we have 3 teal districts. So these 3 districts are an example of cracking, and this is an example of packing. This is why Tom Finneran, the speaker 3 ago, right? So it was DeLeo, then DeMassey, and then what's his face, Finneran. He overpacked Black voters in Boston, and he lied about it, which is why he went to jail. Okay, and then finally, one last piece is who is in charge of redistricting. Senator Will Brownsberger, who represents Watertown, Alston, Brighton, a bunch of other places, is in charge of redistricting on the Senate side. So you'll hear us talk about Brownsberger all the time, and that's why. And then Mike Moran is in charge of redistricting on the House side. They have pretty different approaches, which we will get into during this session. But for the most part, when you hear Brownsberger, think who is in charge on the Senate side, Moran, who's in charge on the House side. So that's a brief overview of some terminology. And then so far, the maps came out from Brownsberger and Moran on Tuesday. The hearing is tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And then public testimony is all due by Monday at 5. And believe it or not, this is a slightly more transparent process than most legislation, which is really saying something. So this is the time. You couldn't have picked a better time to hold this event. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Ziba to get us started.
Ziba, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, so before we get in, we're a little behind schedule, but I do want to ask you guys about the priorities. So kind of if you could time lapse the Drawing Democracy input collection process, and Tanisha representing, your constituency and members. Going into the process, what were your priorities, in a more specific geography? Where did you see the specific opportunities, and what were your kind of goals after that consultation, after the census process that resulted in the unity map that you presented. So maybe Beth, you might want to start, and then Roberto, Jordan, you guys can all talk about it from a Drawing Democracy, and then kick it over to Tanisha to talk from your perspective with NAACP Boston branch.
Yep, we've worked with over 100 organizations, including the NAACP Northeastern Conference, New England Congress, something like that. Sorry.
New England Area Conference.
New England Area Conference. So we, the first thing that we did is we worked with grassroots organizations from across the state to submit 103 community of interest maps, which I know many of you have submitted. At the same time, the Legislative Committee on Redistricting was holding hearings by congressional district to hear from community members what people think their neighborhoods are and what's important to them in the redistricting process. After that, we used all of those neighborhood maps to piece together district maps. After we got people to draw what is the ideal district that they want, we pieced those all together as best we could into a statewide map. And what's quite difficult is once you change one piece of a map for redistricting, then it's like a domino effect. There are lots of knock-on effects because you can't really give a district something without taking something else away. And so that turned out to be a very complex process. But we put out a unity map that 2 weeks before the legislature put out their map. So they actually had to react and respond to us, which was really fun. And so that's where we are at the moment.
Right. And go ahead, Tanisha, do you want to, or Roberto and Jordan, do you want, I think it might be helpful to, if there's specific, if we had some priorities, right, as the coalition, do you want to just highlight some of those as well? Beth or Roberto or Jordan, then we can move over to Tanisha.
I can get us started. A few priorities that we have overall is when there are strong BIPOC communities and gateway cities, we wanted to make sure that the districts were weighted towards those BIPOC communities or gateway cities. And so there are a lot of examples from Brockton to Lawrence to Chelsea where the BIPOC communities were kind of drowned out by by wealthier, more conservative, more homeowner, white areas. And so we wanted to make sure that the share of the district that included BIPOC and communities and gateway cities was really weighted towards those areas.
Yeah, I mean, just really, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tanisha.
No. So I'll just weigh in from an NAACP standpoint. As Beth mentioned, our New England Area Conference, which is our state conference that covers that basically represents all of our branches across the Commonwealth and in 5 of the New England states, really was focused on access and representation. I mean, that was our primary focus, both from a statewide standpoint as well as locally. Now, as Beth mentioned, when it comes to redistricting, there are a lot of guardrails that we have relative to the Voting Rights Act. And so for us, we knew that there were probably about 4-ish areas where we could play. And meaning that there were some opportunities for us to potentially increase representation, both from a racial and ethnic standpoint, but also from a geographic standpoint. We've got, our jurisdiction covers from the Berkshires to Martha's Vineyard, right? And so we do have rural communities that have people of color in them within our catchment area. And so we were keeping a very close eye, certainly on Boston, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment, Springfield, Brockton, and also the Worcester area, because those were areas where we not only saw shifts from a demographic from a population standpoint, but also from a demographic standpoint, opportunities, again, to increase representation. From a process standpoint, as Beth mentioned, our state conference president was connected into the Drawing Democracy Coalition, and locally within each of the communities, Boston, I'll talk about that, we were actively monitoring what was happening on the ground. So for us here in Boston, when you look at the Senate maps, right, we know that, again, staying within those voting rights, within the voting rights guardrails, there's really only one opportunity for us to, 1 to 2-ish opportunities for us to really play there to increase representation. And so the question for us was, do we want to push for more opportunity or more certainty? And where we landed was to push for more certainty, as certain can be, because at the end of the day, it's up to the voters. And so to that end, we are certainly pleased with where we've landed at this point on the Senate side. And then similarly, on the House side, we had some shifts going on with some, folks deciding that they're not going to run again. And I know we're going to talk about incumbency and how that plays into this. But, also looking at, again, some opportunities to ensure that representation is not lost. A data point I do want to make sure folks understand is that, right, we have 160 reps and 40 senators. Within the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, there are only 16 members, okay? And so we have and then on the AAPI side, there is an AAPI caucus. I think there are now 3 members. Okay, thank you, 3 members, right? Very low representation from a racial and ethnic standpoint. And so once every 10 years, a priority for us is to protect what we have and grow where we can.
Great, thanks. And Tanisha, there's 0 Black Senate senators right now. Okay, so building on that, you started to give your reaction to the maps that did come out. Sorry about that. So I'd love to hear Jordan, Roberto, everybody, what were your reactions to the maps that came forward? I'm not sure. I don't see anybody off mute, so I'm not sure what to do there.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say real quickly, Mass Alliance's concern was twofold. One was ensuring that they weren't doing shenanigans like trying to hurt progressives. And since we're a C4, we're allowed to look at sort of the impact on the broader sort of electoral political community in a way that a C3 isn't. So we were concerned, we wanted to make sure that they didn't mess with our progressive allies and didn't sort of squash opportunities for progressive change. And I think the other thing, in addition to obviously the access for people of color, that we were also concerned with was also ensuring sort of that there wasn't, I think one of the things that you can do is sort of dilute the ability of people of color to have a say for the sake of keeping Democrats in play, but they often are terrible Democrats. So we were also wanted to make sure that we were thinking about those things. And then frankly, also I've been around for 10 years. So I think I just remembered it the last 10 years ago. I remember all the lines or most of the lines from 10 years ago. I'd say I think that mostly, it's a really hard process of redistricting. We oversimplify it to just simply say like, oh, it's good or bad. And it's, there's like good things and bad things. But the truth is you're often balancing, as Tanisha indicated, 2 important things together. We want districts to look okay, we want towns to be together, but also almost by nature, if people of color live in city centers and white, sort of whiter, older folks live in suburbs, you are going to dilute people of color if you are only breaking up cities and keeping towns whole. So I think one of the things that, so I think that there could have been more, my preference would have been for them to, especially in the Senate side, to break up some of the towns more and to give access for more people of color to have power. That being said, there's some real highlights from my perspective. I think Springfield is a real improvement. Worcester is a ginormous improvement on the Senate side. Lawrence and to Methuen and Haverhill is a ginormous improvement on the Senate side. And I think that there was an opportunity to get the balance better in Boston. And I just don't think that it's right, that the balance is quite right. And, you know, we're officially asking them to revisit that. And I think also the Brockton, you know, Avon, Milton is just an absolute, and Randolph is just an absolute missed opportunity. And I think keeping that district largely the same was just a total mistake. And so basically you have that situation where you have all these white towns diluting the ability of a majority Black city to have a say on who represents them, when you could in fact put them with other people of color to do that. So I think the Senate just absolutely could have been much better. The House was fine. I think it was an absolutist perspective, which is just he looked at total population. So therefore there were 33 opportunities to have people of color. In reality, there won't be 33 people of color added because not every person who's a person of color is eligible to vote, let alone does vote regularly. And so, you know, my hope is that we'll be able to capture some of those, but I think more, I wish that Moran had taken into account more of the CVAP and been more interested in changing some of the lines that he created 10 years ago, but he seemed very pleased with what he did 10 years ago because he largely stayed close to what he did. So that would be my only change.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, as Jordan just mentioned, right? Moran was very much used total population only. And then on the complete opposite side, it feels like Senator Brownsberger was really only focused on CVAP. And, you know, I think the law is not clear on, there are different legal rationales that can be used and that have been, you know, that have been said that are okay beyond what he did. I think he was using very much if you cannot find 50% plus one CVAP people of a single minority group, you can't do anything about it. Like you literally like can't take race into consideration at all, which honestly just seems wrong to me. And it's just, you know, I think there are other, you know, it's just because something is not mandated does not make it illegal, right? Like you can take some things into consideration to put people of color of multiple, you know, like different types of people of color together in order to form a coalition district. I think that is something that the Supreme Court has allowed, especially I believe that if it's like you know, progressive white voters and people of color, you can also create a coalition district. And I actually think that the coalition, like multiracial coalition, the Supreme Court has not decided, but I think like different districts, different circuits, some have allowed it, some have not. So I think it's something that is still up for debate. And like you can have the political courage to do things to elevate the voices and the representation of people of color, and the senator has chosen not to. And I think it's really could have been a lot better. And you can really see that in Brockton. It's the Brockton district is just absolutely abysmal. Yeah.
I agree. As someone who was raised in Brockton, you know, and has seen very little shifts in political representation since the time I was a child. But yet seeing the shifts in demographics over the past, I won't tell you how many decades that is, it is disappointing to see not only, you know, this moment not being used to help increase representation, but recognizing, especially when there's so much data to suggest that absent some shift, we're going to continue to see the only really Black majority city in the Commonwealth be represented entirely by, you know, a delegation that is white.
The only one in New England.
And that's concerning, right? But at the same time, I do want to really press on what Beth raised earlier about the Voting Rights Act. I think we have to recognize too that we're operating in a moment where the Voting Rights Act is fragile. It's being challenged at every opportunity. And this Supreme Court has demonstrated a willingness to pick at it chip by chip. And so I do think it is important as we're going through this process certain to just be mindful of how we're moving and where we're pressing and how we're pressing. And so to that point, I agree with Roberto about, thinking about these coalition districts and thinking about, to Jordan's point, kind of the groupings ideological districts and how those might help to get us greater representation.
Interesting. So on the process, and both Moran and Brownsberger, it seems like they had different approaches. What grade would you give Moran? What grade would you give Brownsberger? And maybe in your responses, can you talk a little bit about what you heard from them in terms of some of the assumptions or working principles that they were each approaching it? I heard something about so-and-so didn't want towns to be split up or whatever. So if you could talk a little bit about some of those pieces, and also I'd love to hear about incumbents and how were incumbents addressed in this process and how were their interests taken into account. And then why don't we start with Roberto, just to mix it up a little bit.
Sure. I guess on the House side, I think, as was mentioned earlier, right, I think CVAP could have been used a little bit more to make sure that kind of focus on not just, so when you use only the total population, right, you allow for better districts as the 10 years happen, right, because some of those people become citizens, right? So it does give you long-term gains. I think that by focusing only on total population, you lost some of those kind of short-term gains that I think you could have had if you took CVAP into consideration at all, right? Like I think about the Jessica Giannino district in Rivera. That district is not going to elect a person of color, even though it's a majority POC district by total population. It's just absolutely, like, there's just no chance based on the citizen voting age population rates that she is going to have a person of color challenge her and win. And so I think I would probably, B plus, A minus, somewhere in that range. Like it was a good map, but I think, there could have been some improvements. I think on the Senate side, honestly, I'm really, really stuck on this Brockton district. It is just abysmal. And then the Boston situation, I think, is also, I didn't consider it to be good. I think that there are ways to draw a majority Black district that actually is stronger than the one that he drew, and still create a coalition district where you can have very close to 50% CVAP people of color, and a coalition with the white people of JP, who tend to be fairly progressive and have elected a woman of color to be their representative, have elected a woman of color to be their senator and the congresswoman, right? So like we know that these voters align with the community of interest of people of color. So you could draw a second district that does that, right, without having necessarily a POC majority. Instead, what we have is this sandwich where you have the close to 50% people of color district is actually on the east side of Boston, but the white people there are Southie and Neponset, which is just very different. Like those people are not going to vote for the candidate of choice of community of color. And then all the people in JP are actually kind of with West Roxbury and all the suburbs and so on down in a 75% white district. They're just not, just based on demographics, it's going to be a really, really tough choice tough time for a person of color to get elected there. So I think that there are just ways to draw Boston better, and instead of just focusing on keeping communities whole, just find a way to just draw districts that are prioritize the needs of people of color, and then figure out the rest of it, because the suburbs, frankly, have plenty of representation. And some people, will fight me on this, but there's not a whole lot of difference between a lot of these cities and the suburbs. There's just not. And so if we're really just prioritizing their boundaries, just because somebody drew these boundaries 200 years ago, that's not how we should be drawing districts.
I agree. I think, and this is where the incumbency piece comes in. This is where the politics comes in, right? This is where the culture of our state legislature comes in trying to, be collegial, to their colleagues. And really in that sense, recognizing that from a political and cultural standpoint, the practice is, not to disrupt a district that, one of your colleagues is intending to run for reelection in, and Clearly, as you've articulated, Roberto, that presents a challenge when we're trying to, draw fairer, more representative, more inclusive, more empowering districts. But that's something, we could be here for a whole other session talking about the culture of Massachusetts politics and protecting incumbency, right? But it definitely comes into play here.
I think there's a podcast and everything about it that Jordan's on, and Jonathan.
Roberto, what was your Brownsburger grade?
I don't know that I gave him one. I don't know, D+. I'm really stuck on the Boston and Brockton. There are some good things in Worcester, and there are some good things. I think that Boston and again, the centers of Black Massachusetts were not done a good service. So I think that just drags me down to a D.
You got an A on the first paper and a D on the final, so went down. Tanisha, what are your? Go ahead, Jordan.
So I just want to say to answer the question about what happened, I think in to Heather's point about Waltham and other places around the city. So there is some protection for incumbency in the law. So they can't just get rid of incumbents. If they do that, they have to sort of have a reason, and they have to there's a federal protection. So and they have to equal it. You can't get rid of a Republican and then not get rid of a Democrat. Although Republican states seem to do this and have no problems with it. So I'm dubious that this law is ever enforced. But there is supposed to be some protections around these sorts of things that make it difficult. That really explains a lot of what's happening in Waltham, where you have the former mayor sort of living in the city, and then they got to wrap this district in a weird way. So it looks similar to before, but you're sort of trying to group people of color together. I think that's what's happening. I just want to say also, Roberto drew maps that do some of the things he's saying. So it's not just oh, we think we could do it. We all went through a process of drawing 209 maps several times over. So I have a lot of patience. I know when I once moved a line for state rep district, I had to move 70 other districts, and I almost cried. I was just what? It's really difficult. So I do have some patience. This is not an easy process to try to get right. And so part of what happens when people say, what happened here? It's I'm sure what happened is he moved one line and then he was well, I got to do something else. I got to figure something else. It's the definition of zero sum. So it's always hard to tease out, especially for the House. It's hard to tease out exactly what you, what was done in those places. So I think those for me are I try to take those into account. So for Worcester, I'll explain the Worcester Senate map that I really appreciate. So
you want me to bring it up?
What?
You want me to bring it up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So the Worcester map, what it does on the Senate side is traditionally it just sort of cut the city in half. But people of color live in the middle of the city. So what was happening is that the people of color's community was split in half. And when we went and testified and talked to Brownsburger, he listened to that to his credit, and he very clearly tried to bring in all the people of color, or I shouldn't say all the people of color, as many people of color as possible into the Harriet Chandler district, which is traditionally the home of the sort of center of the city. So where people of color moved, he did a good job of capturing some of those people into those places. He couldn't capture all of them to sort of create what he needed to create, but he captured a lot of them, which was the request of people in Worcester, was to not sort of dilute people of color so that we didn't have a say in the district. Additionally, it allows people of color in the sort of southern part of the city and the purple right there, it allows them to still have a say in a second district. So it doesn't pack us into Harriet Chandler's district. And there's not enough people of color to create our own district. So there's not enough of us for a majority minority district, but we do have a lot of power now in the Harriet Chandler district and who we get to pick. Additionally, he sort of split off the whitest parts of the city, the west side. So if you look at where our school committee, which is currently being sued for being racist in its configuration, they all live in that top blue-green corner right up there. They all live there, which is horrid. And so they're no longer able to control a state senate district. We will have sort of, they're in Angobi's district, which is more like the communities that they are, even though it's in the city of Worcester, it's more like some of the rural places Angobi has. And then on the Michael Moore, he sort of has some of the whiter folks on the water. So Lake Quinsigamond on the east side cuts the city, and it sort of allows them to do the same. So why is it important? because you're basically, what you're doing is you're allowing people of color to stay together and dispersing some white voters in a way that then allows people of color to have more of a say in who will be representing us. And I live right in the center, in the poorest part of the city. Who will represent us, right? Who we now have an outsized say in that, and that's what we want. If we don't have the ability to have a majority people of color district, we wanted in this process to have the ability to have the say, to have an outsized say in who will be representing us. And that was definitely accomplished in Worcester, and I'm very excited about it. On the House side, he basically didn't move any lines. There were two communities that are majority minority districts, and he kept that. The David LaBeouf district was the purple one on the bottom. He just cut some of the whiter voters in there and kept it basically the same. It does have a lot of people of color in it. I wish he had done more there, but that's really nitpicking at that point. Like, I understand you have to count votes, and it's hard to get it all there. You can't do it perfectly. Similarly for Lawrence, so I think Lawrence is really, it's obviously, there's been a lot of talk. I just want to talk about really quick on the Senate side, and then I'll be done talking. Lawrence Lawrence traditionally has been with Andover, and it has never been able to have a say in who its representative, even though it's majority people of color. So Lawrence is overwhelmingly Latinx. It should be able to pick a state senator. When it has been paired with Andover and North Andover, it has not done that. It has not been able to have a say on who it is in their their representative. By taking it out of that, by taking it out of the suburbs and putting it with more like-minded voters, the Latinx community will now have the ability to elect someone. And it mirrors the way in which Latinx people are flowing in the city. They are going on the river into Methuen and into Haverhill, right across the river in a corridor. And you can see it when you pull out the census block. So what Senator Brownsberger did is actually required by law. So I'm actually bemused that people are like freaking out. It's required by law. There is an opportunity for Latinx voters in the law, Hispanic voters, to have a majority position, to have a say on who they elect. He is required by law to then draw that district, to give those voters an opportunity to have a say on who their person is. And to not do that would have been, in my mind, to break the law. And that's actually what's frustrating about what's happening in Brockton, because we think he similarly has that requirement.
Roberto or Jordan, do you want to touch on Springfield real quick also?
Sure, I can do that. So in the Springfield district, this is a better district than before. That is the bottom line. So the main piece is, it took Adam Gomez, a beloved Latinx Puerto Rican community member, 9 years after the previous district had been drawn to be able to win an upset election in a majority POC Senate district. So, this is all to say, sometimes it just takes a long time. It used to be that Springfield was heavily combined with West Springfield. And so the weight of the district was, even though Springfield is much larger, the weight of the district was actually in West Springfield. So what this map accomplishes is it combines most of the POC parts of Springfield. So it combines, I think, there are 5 state house districts in Springfield. 4 of them are majority POC. It has all 4 of the majority POC house districts in Springfield in the state Senate district, and then really grabs the more Latinx part of Chicopee, so that Latinx voters, Black voters in Springfield and Chicopee will pretty reliably have a very likely progressive legislator of color who reflects and responds to the needs of working class BIPOC folks. So this is a bright spot on the map. And then in Chelsea, honestly, there was a lot of
Beth,
yeah.
Before we move from this area, I want to move over there. I just want to say I do think the people of Holyoke deserve better. Just politically speaking, I feel like this district, John Bellis's district, if you take out Holyoke, it is 88% white, and Holyoke itself is I think it's 51% Latinx. So I just want to say that, because I feel that.
I know. It's one of those things where it's really unfortunate that Holyoke is like, it's just under 40,000 people. It's 38,000 people. And it's just, it is, Springfield is too big to, and Holyoke is a little bit too far to very easily connect the two. But Holyoke is also a little bit inconveniently far away, but not too far away from Northampton. And so Holyoke is in kind of a bad position, like literally a bad position, to be combined in a convenient way for lots of the Latinx voters there. And so it does kind of suck to be in Holyoke. And then in Chelsea, in Everett, honestly, there was a ton of discussion in the Drawing Democracy Coalition about how to group East Boston, Chelsea, Everett, Revere, and Lynn. The big problem is, or one of the problems is, there are many potential state senators or incumbents in those regions. It is hard to find ways to get all of them a district. And so I think where we landed is that one of the key decision points is how do we handle white progressive voters, crossover voters, knowing that progressives who elect Mike Connolly in Cambridge are substantially different from white people who elect Jeff Turco in Revere, right? Those are totally different. Those are white people of totally different political proclivities. And so in Chelsea, we kept the district pretty similar on the Senate side, but on the House side, the biggest opportunity is there's an incumbent-free Chelsea district, which means that there should be a progressive Latinx member of the House in January of 2023. Something would badly have to go wrong for that not to happen. Like highly split progressives is probably the most likely story, leading to a potential conservative person from Chelsea winning. And so that really speaks to how redistricting is like part of the solution, but not the entire solution to our problems. We do need good alignment in the progressive movement to make sure that we aren't fracturing the vote. And so that is one of the main stories for Chelsea. And then in terms of grades, I would give Brownsburger an A for effort. Like he really spent so much time with so many people having long deliberative conversations all of the time. And then I think he actually did pretty well in especially Worcester, Springfield, dividing Lawrence from Andover. But he really missed some massive opportunities in Boston, in Brockton. And so I think I would land at like maybe like a C. And then I think Moran was honestly, Moran is like a pick up the phone and talk to him at whatever time of day legislator. And so, and I think he really enjoyed having a pretty empty state house, because that means that not everyone was bugging him in his office all the time about redistricting. So totally different style and approach, but with a couple of exceptions, notably, I think in New Bedford and in Revere, where the House districts could be much stronger. I think the map is pretty good. I would put it at an A- or B+. And I think that there are some incumbent-free districts in the heart of Brockton that are phenomenal. There's that incumbent-free Methuen and Lawrence district that I think is going to elect someone good as long as there's good progressive alignment. But I think one of the pieces, like Moran's map, is not going to turn over, it's not going to, other than those three districts, isn't going to net the biggest change in 2023. But I am hoping that with good base building, strong electoral work, and good candidates from leadership development, there should be good people running for office by like 2025, 2027, seated in 2025 and 2027. But it does mean that we need a lot of progressive movement alignment and good leadership development to actually make Moran's map play out in the way that we want it to.
So It's about 5 minutes left. We've been answering some of the questions in the chat. I know some of the panelists can stay later. What I'm going to do is ask a final question that leads to action items, and then we'll take a pause at 8 for if some folks need to leave, and then we'll just have the rest of that section will be just Q&A, and either you can throw your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand through using reactions on the bottom, and we'll call on you to come off mute. So I guess my question, Tanisha, I'd like to come back to you, which is so there's a lot of, it seems like there's a pretty strong consensus that Brockton should not have happened. And so is there room for pressuring on that front? It also sounds like there's maybe, different perspectives on Boston could be better. Is there any appetite to go further there? So I guess from your perspective, and also after you coming back to the others, what is the next step? Where is the pressure going to happen? Do we have hope for pressure? And what can the members of the audience do to support, these sharp priorities?
Yeah, so I'll start with Boston. Look, it is deeply concerning to us that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have no representation from the Black community in the Senate. Okay, that has to change. And creating more relative certainty that we can get there within certainly the guardrails of the law was a top priority. And so while there's always more we can do, that for us is like, we cannot go another 10 years, literally, with no representation there. Imagine what the policing reform debate would have been like had there been a Black man sitting among the 40 or a Black woman sitting among the 40. Different conversation, just by virtue of experience, right? So Brockton, absolutely. I mean, I think what was outlined at the beginning in terms of timing, right? We have the hearing tomorrow. I think there is an opportunity for folks to weigh in the hearing, and also through other public testimony over the course of the next few days or so. I do think so a couple of things. Brockton, I think we need to figure out what the strategy is around pushing for more change there. I also think something to watch is what is going to happen up there with Haverhill, because there is some debate within communities of color about how those district lines were drawn. And so, we absolutely, Lawrence creates an opportunity for greater Latinx representation, more diversity there. But again, I just want to raise the flag that there is potentially a fight brewing up there in that area that we may need to weigh in on. But action, look, it's not over until it's over. And so where there are opportunities for us to push for more, I lean more toward the certainty, because it's only once every 10 years. I think we need to do it. And Brockton absolutely is an area where that can and should happen.
Yeah, if you live in Brockton, write to your newspaper, write to talk to reporters, talk to community organizations, raise all kinds of hell, because it's an injustice that what they're doing.
Yeah, the other thing I want to say, this piece around taking time, and it is true. I mean, 2011 was good for the congressional lines, but that work started decades before, right, to shift those lines in communities of color, right, to create that opportunity. But where I believe there's an opportunity for us to do more and to really catalyze the impact of this work is on the ground when it comes to the cultivation of candidates. I don't think we have to wait 3-5 years to do that. I think, what it takes is, encouraging people to step up and run. You know, and once people take that, you know, kind of take that initial step, being supportive of them through that process. I am, you know, I think especially in communities of color and with women, right? The data says that like we wait for it to be perfect before we raise our hands to do it. And so I think as a progressive community, we need to be in coalition with communities of color to beat back that myth. It doesn't have to be perfect for you to step up and run, right? And so in that respect, we could have, whether it's in 22 or, you know, we'll talk about municipal at some point, you know, whether it's 22 or it's 24, we could potentially have a wave of new faces in our state legislature if we really work together to just encourage more women and more people of color to take that first step and then support them.
I agree with all that Tanisha said. That is going to take a lot of volunteer power, a lot of volunteer time, hours. So please, when you see awesome people running, like just get out there, you know, go knock all the doors and do all of the things. Because I actually do worry, and you know, I've talked about this with other folks, that, you know, if we have too many people running and not enough people volunteering, then there's going to be a shortage of volunteers, which, you know, we've seen to some extent in Boston right now. There's a lot of campaigns that are doing a lot of really great work, and you know, I'm part of the Elect the Boston School Committee campaign, right? And that was one of the things that we had to figure out as we were launching the campaign is, you know, are we going to have volunteers? And it is a challenge. So please make sure that you're doing everything that you can to get folks elected.
All right, before we get to questions, I do want to make sure from the Drawing Democracy Coalition perspective that we've got the clear ask. What can people do tomorrow before Monday to push on Brockton, especially in any other priorities? Okay, there it is. You want to talk that through, Beth?
Yep, hot off the press, we've got the response to the House and Senate maps from the Drawing Democracy Coalition with the clear outline of what the percentages are and all of that. So take a look. If you agree with that, we have 2 click to emails because we actually have a different letter for the Senate and a different letter for the House. So please email your senator, email your rep, testify tomorrow if you agree. And we have just a couple more days to keep pushing. I believe that we can make change, especially I think in Brockton, where I think we have the most glaring problem with the Senate districts. Please do write to your senator, write to your rep, testify tomorrow. If you live in Brockton, Avon, Randolph, or Stoughton, please put something in the enterprise. We will keep pushing hard especially on the Brockton district, which I think is the most glaring part of the Senate map. And then you know, I think there will be amazing candidates who run. It could be you. And we definitely want you to take up the mantle, run for one of these districts. And I hope everyone here knocks the door, makes a call, or gives generously.
Jordan, any other action items? Okay, and it doesn't have to just be if you live in Brockton or any of the other towns. If you know anybody, go brief them and get them to call as well. All right, so we're just going to pause for a sec. If folks need to jump off, that's fine, including any of the panelists, because we're sort of jumping this extra time on you guys. But I did want to start getting to some of the questions. I did see one earlier from Russell about Boston. You wanted to talk through House districts in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. And then Jordan, I saw you ask for more detail, but maybe if somebody want to go through the House Boston districts briefly.
I think overall, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if the person could come off mute and just give a little, I agree with Jordan, just a little bit more specificity on the question.
Russell, I can,
sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I'm driving, so I'm just, no, I haven't gotten a chance to look at the map super carefully. I kind of like looked at them quickly, but I live in Dorchester, and I'm just would be sort of interested to hear kind of if people have any thoughts about how those districts changed, or any like opportunities that people see. Could they be better? Do they seem like an improvement? Anything like that. And especially thinking about increasing Black representation in the legislature. So that's all.
I think just kind of the biggest thing that happened is that Liz Malia's district kind of got, I think, taken apart a little bit because she has announced, or I guess she has not announced, Lisa Kaczynski just said that she is going to retire. And so kind of that's why Nika's district ended up going into Liz Malia's district to combine them there. And then that kind of moved China Tyler's district further into Roxbury. And then Liz Miranda's district lost, I think, a precinct here in Fields Corner. And I forget, I think Brandy had part of Milton already, but that changed a little bit. I think those are kind of the biggest changes that I can think of right now.
There was a little bit of shift between Fluker, Oakley, and Holmes as well. There, I think, one of the things specifically as it relates to Nika Eligardo's district, which you see is a shift more into more communities of color, right? So that district has a strong progressive base, as we well know, but it's a white progressive base, right? And so that shift there does bring more, actually it increases, I believe, the Black representation in her district. So
also more economic,
and economic, and absolutely more economic diversity for her too.
Yeah, the other big Boston district that changed entirely is Dan Ryan's, just because he lost Chelsea, so he had to pick up 40,000 people. And so he kind of went a precinct into Everett and then kind of snaked through MIT down into the Fenway area. So that's a wildly different district from what it used to be.
And Santiago then pushed further south, right?
So he goes into,
his line shifted. So there absolutely was on the House side shifting, some probably more careful than others. But in most instances, I don't know, Roberto, what your thought, in most instances, the districts picked up more racial and ethnic diversity, I think, is the net impact for.
I believe so, yeah. I think ultimately that's what ended up happening, yeah.
Sadly, Nika lost Mission Hill, and she's no longer my rep, which is heartbreaking to me. But these are the sacrifices we make. And John Santiago, I think, moved over there.
Yeah.
And missed her by one street. It's not fair.
It's I think Moran, I think, said in the meeting that basically they created stronger people of color districts and more across the city of Boston than there was before. I think he mostly did a really good job in Boston, just to be clear. I think we could, if I were really being critical, I think there's a Milton piece that Brandy should have picked up and you could have figured out something else. But I think what he did with Dan makes sense. I think Russell, again, if you move something, you got to move something else, right? So that's like peace. You can't pull out one and be like, I want this. Something else has to change that. So I think, you get knock-on effects between Russell and Liz Miranda. And I think being bold around with Liz Malia, Nika being together, obviously Liz Malia leaving gives an opportunity for that, but that created opportunities for more people of color being grouped together, which I think was good. So I think overall it makes a lot of sense. I certainly understand what he did, having dug into this, and I think it's defensible. I think you can see what he's trying to do.
Yeah. What other? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Are you sticking on Boston?
I think an important piece is basically from the top part of, I would say, from China Tyler and John Santiago's district all the way down to Brockton. It's all majority minority districts.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely a varying strength, right? So I think Russell Holmes district is maybe 5% white.
He shared that he is no longer the most diverse. I think Liz Miranda's might be.
Okay. Either
Might
way,
have a higher percentage.
those two districts are going to be like 90% POC, right? But so they're all of varying strength, but I think what is important is that the entire core of Boston to Brockton is majority minority. That has not happened before. And I think I think that there is a very specific cut of each district to ensure that there is a balance, that the balance of the district is weighted towards people of color. So that was not something that had to happen, right? I think that was not a set of calculations where Moran was saying, oh, I think it has to go over 50% eligible voters. Like, that was a choice to draw both short and long-term opportunities for people of color from the entire corridor, from basically the formerly redlined parts of Boston all the way to Brockton. And that was a big choice. And then in contrast, when we look at the Senate map, it's definitely a choice for Brownsburger to draw a very safe seat for hopefully a progressive Black leader to run in. And then Brownsburger did not actually use that same choice to create an opportunity. So, Brownsburger created a very good short-term opportunity, short-term and permanent opportunity for a Black leader in Boston. However, he could have created an intermediate opportunity for a Black leader in Randolph or Brockton, and he did not do that. So while there are legal considerations, there also are political choices that were made from that entire Boston to Brockton corridor that each chair made or did not make. But there should be huge movement in that area in the next 10 years based off of who's moving into that region. And given its proximity to Beacon Hill, like, there should be a lot of discussion and weight towards that region in the next decade.
I just want to quickly mention, so there are different ways of measuring the Black CVAP population, right? So there's Black only, there is non-Hispanic Black, and there is also any part Black, which is kind of, if you're Black and white, then you would count as any part Black, and so those are kind of like three different measures. I believe, so this map that we're looking at is through Dave's redistricting. I believe the Black percentage here is Black only, and the district that is drawn here in the middle, which is supposed to be the Black district, does say that it's 47.3% Black, which falls under 50%. I'm just putting that out there as something that I have been thinking a lot about the last couple of days. Like, I just think the districts that we drew, which create both a Black district and a district of opportunity for a coalition, that Black district that we drew was about 53% Black under these numbers, right? So it's not only better in that it creates a second district, it is also a better Black district, in my opinion. So that's just another, piece that is really, I think, has been bothering me about this map in particular.
That's good. We have a question about Concord, which is predominantly white town, was all in one district. How significant is it that it was now split into two rep districts? But before we get there, I have a question about CVAP and the census and all that kind of stuff. If we know that there was undercounts of communities of color in this census, can we assume that areas, areas that are, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, that they have a higher percentage of Black or Latinx of different groups that it's would go in the same direction so they're still representative of a trend that would be representative of more people of color in those districts, or not necessarily? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think somebody said that Chelsea or something was undercounted by like X, 20,000 or something like that. So is that an indicator that it's just more, or is that not, and it doesn't matter, I guess?
So it doesn't matter in terms of, it doesn't matter in terms of the law, right? The law only is looking at the number of people that were counted there, right?
Right.
Like, we're only looking at the counts. However, there is a kind of an allowance of 5% up or 5% down that you can have to make sure that districts are, kind of within range. And you can actually see them over here on the left side, right? So District 96 is 159 people under the ideal district size. And then District 97 is 1,465 people over. And so you can use that in kind of ways, including, if we know there's an undercount, you could choose to have districts where we know people were undercounted be smaller. By and large, that was not done. And actually, I just want to really quickly bring this up because I think it's problematic in some way. In the Senate proposal, so districts 1 through 10 are basically the districts that are like Worcester and west of Worcester. And you can see here that the districts are all about 8,000, 8,500, 8,000, 8,500 people under, which means that Central and Western Mass are essentially getting an extra like half a district just based on these, based on the fact that the districts are smaller. And then you have, my district over here with Senator Jiménez is about 77 people over the ideal size, which I think there are ways in which you could even bring a third district fully into Boston if you had more of a balanced approach here.
Wow, that's super interesting. Okay, over to Concord. Do you mind answering? Does anybody have any insight into that one? It's
it's so I guess I'd say this is I've actually had a bunch of people ask me about this recently, which is very strange. I don't think you have an unalienable right to have your city, your town like together. And so if you are trying to carve together, if you're trying to carve together 160 districts, you're going to have to carve up some of these towns, especially in the suburbs, when you start to get out away from Boston, right? Like you just are going to start carving these up. Acton was already split in half, right? Like Acton, that already happened to Acton. And so Concord grew, it has more people. It's hard to keep together when you have growth in some of these suburbs. You're gonna, if you're having to get to 160, it's gonna be difficult to keep everything together. So we don't like, somebody would have to ask Moran specifically why he had to break apart Concord when it wasn't broken apart in the past. I don't know for sure like why he decided to do that. I can tell you again, having drawn 209 districts, that like it was 1,000% because something else had to change, right? Like it's just a knockdown and trying to get your numbers and also trying to keep incumbents together in their place when you can, because you don't want to cause too much trouble and like you might open yourself up to legal challenges. And then also there's the culture that Tanisha very much talked about, where they could have, at least made some incumbents challenge each other, but didn't, because that's not the way they do things, right? So you have to keep people in their districts, essentially. You have to create 160, you have to make them all equal within 5% of the standard. And so it's difficult. Yeah, so not knowing exactly where he drew, like without knowing for sure, because no one talked to him, like that's my guess of what happened, is that it just became a knockdown and Acton was already broken apart, and it becomes easier to put a neighbor broken apart when you've already broken apart the town next to it, right? Like it's
the only requirement under the Constitution in Massachusetts is that if you have less than 2,500 residents, you cannot be split.
Yeah,
but that's only like a few towns over in the western part of Mass.
Yeah, I will say also just having more representatives. I live in Worcester, and it's nothing. I want to give comfort to people. It is fine. Like you get more people, you get more bites at the apple to have a say for your town. So currently Concord had one person who had a say. Now you have two people who have responsibility and say. You will have more power vis-a-vis that. My rep is one person, but I can call most of the other Worcester state reps and say, do this thing. And now rather than just one of them, I now have four of them who can do this thing. So I want to say, I don't know why Concord got split up, but I do think it will give Concord more power, and you all should embrace the ability of Concord to have more power. Yeah, I think Concord split was probably ripple from Framingham. Yeah, it's just, like I said, you redraw one district, I redrew 70 other districts. It is just that. It is just that.
We've got another question. Well, it's just more maybe of a comment, but Michael lists about, I guess it is a question. So was there really not a way to draw a majority minority Senate district centered in Lawrence Methuen without including the center of Haverhill?
not only do you need to, but it would be wrong to the people in Haverhill to not include them. Like, it just, to be clear, there are people of color who then would have their votes diluted by all of the other towns around it. For what purpose? Like, there's not, and so you would be missing an opportunity for the people of color who live in the center of Haverhill, who very much share, both language, community with the community organizers who testified at the hearing on that, talked about how their community, the work they do with young people spans Lawrence, Methuen, Haverhill. So it also was testified on the record that that's what was happening. You would, to do that, I think you would be in violation of I think to not include them would be a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And I think you had to include them by law. I think the thing that the Drawing Democracy Coalition pointed out is there are other Latinx communities in Haverhill who weren't included in that and should be. So rather than saying, like, why isn't Haverhill included? We want all of the Latinx community in Haverhill to be included, not discluded.
But Haverhill over or under, Roberto? Is there room? And then,
say that again.
I said, was Haverhill over that Senate district? Do they have room? You know how you just showed the Western Mass?
Oh, yeah, we can look. Let's see.
Okay, I'm just going to acknowledge, I don't think there's a question. Harry really is missing Nico like me. But let's go to Jonathan Lowell.
Yeah, the currently Desaglio district is 8,700 people. Smaller than ideal. So you could add people. You might run into problems with District 20, which is actually no. You could take some people because it's 5,600 over. So you could do it. You could definitely do it without changing anything.
Folks, you guys can lobby for your missing precincts. And then where did I just say? Oh, Lowell. What's the thinking in Lowell? They lost more liberal suburbs in place of more conservative suburbs. What was the rationale for that? John thinks that maybe it was redraw increases Lowell's ability to carry a primary? Question mark?
I actually don't know what the thinking was on this Lowell district. I could not explain it. But, I think that Lowell is really different from the communities further to the west and along the New Hampshire border. And it's unclear to me why Senator Brownsberger did that. I think we had proposed combining it with Chelmsford and maybe like Tewksbury or something like that, which I think people definitely think of as Lowell suburbs. But I'm guessing that, but my guess is that because of the way that Lawrence and Methuen are combined and to split Lawrence from Andover, I'm guessing that probably just needed to combine Lowell with a bunch of other places. And moving west was probably the most convenient of those choices. I think overall, given the population increase in Lowell in the past 10 years and the likely continued population increase, my guess is that the weight of the district is going to stay in Lowell, right? So even though it's combined in kind of a strange way, I think as long as Lowell continues to be about, it's a little north of 100,000 people, as long as that weight of the district is still 60% Lowell or 70% Lowell, I think it should be okay in the next 10 years.
Great.
I'll just say also really quickly, very surprisingly, John Cronin's district grew a lot. And to Tanisha's point about sort of thinking of people of color as only sort of East Coast Boston, Brockton, a lot of that is in Fitchburg and Leominster to a lesser extent. And so although the other piece of this is John Cronin's district has sort of pushed the other direction, which again, I don't know why he drew the little district he did. We did cover it in retrospect, and so I don't know what the thinking was, but I do know, having drawn so many of these maps, that John Cronin's district is a real problem just because it grew so big. It grew a lot. And I was really surprised by that. Again, these are some things you don't know until you dig in, like some of the places where there's growth, and that was surprising. But I think that's also part of it, is that he actually had to shrink, which makes it difficult then to push him eastward into that northern eastern places where you might have thought about pushing him.
I guess I'm a little bit more, I feel a little bit more negative about the Lowell district. because I think that, you know, there are a lot of like independent unenrolled voters who live in these areas who, you know, voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And so it is, it bothers me. It bothers me that the electorate is going to be more conservative, and they're actually, I think less likely to elect a person of color, even if they still elect a Democrat.
I mean, I guess I think it's part of, I agree with you. I don't disagree that I don't think it's not a great district for what happened to Lowell, but I guess I'd say those voters had to go somewhere, and it's not clear to me where they go because they can't go into the John Cronin district.
Well, we have a good progressive mass chapter in Lowell, so you guys will have your work cut out for you, I'm afraid.
Yeah. It definitely lost, it picked up worse towns. Like, to be clear, it didn't get better. I think got worse, but we'll see.
Okay, so I want to open, if there are any other questions, please raise your hand. And I also know there's some folks from Brockton here. If any of you guys want to weigh in, we'd love to hear from you live with some of your local wisdom, but no pressure. And in the meantime, while questions are coming, oh yeah. So what is, this is an interesting question. So question with Claire Cronin, likely to leave for Ireland, is that create an opportunity in Brockton? And maybe someone could talk to that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So what I think one of the more brilliant things that Mike Moran did was he actually moved Jerry Cassidy into Cronin's old district, which opens up this beautiful incumbent-free district in the heart of Brockton. And so as long as we don't do anything stupid and split the vote like 6 ways among progressives and allow one conservative person to take the winner takes all, there should be an amazing member of a progressive organization in Brockton who is the state rep for the heart of Brockton. Like, that should happen as long as we don't do something totally dumb.
All right.
Yeah, I just want to echo that and say we were all shocked. None of us even proposed it. We were all just like, wait, that's a really brilliant thing. It's a real opportunity. Brockton has both, it has enough to support 2 districts. And so he brought Michelle Dubois' district all into Brockton, which was the right decision to do. And we're really happy he did that. But it can't support 3 whole state rep districts. So it can only support 2 and some. And so no matter what, you're going to have people of color with some of the towns, and none of the towns surrounding it are any good. And you can't, like the state Senate, where you can sort of have enough people to go up in the Milton and Randolph, you just can't do that here. Like, you could try, it gets really complicated. I tried a couple of times, but it's just hard to do. Like, you could get to maybe the south part of Randolph, but it's not easy. So what he did by moving Jerry Cassidy in with that is really brilliant, and like, should be a great opportunity. I just want to echo what Beth said.
So Jordan, so I agree. The only thing I don't agree with is the comment about the surrounding towns. Again, Brockton raised and lived in some of those other towns as well over my time. So they're, but we can make something happen down there.
I'm gonna kick it over to Jacqueline Jones. Do you want to come off mute?
Thank you. So hello, Tanisha, who I've known.
Hi, how are you?
A wee one. We won't talk about, you said those decades. I won't talk about my centuries, but anyway, I wanted to just, the suggestion that was made about having someone maybe in position or something with that open seat. I would just like to say, or just ask, even could be, like a follow-up. I think that what's really needed is for someone to sort of bring that conversation to the forefront. I think that that's sort of really strong political organizing, believe it or not, is still kind of new to Brockton. Brockton is still almost like black and white TV, and color is still considered a really big deal. You know what I'm saying? I think that this kind of really progressive, it happens in spots as opposed to with some kind of, and I know COVID prevented a lot of that door-to-door kind of just grassroots I think that we lost out a lot because the census, there were just a few voices in Brockton. So Moses Rodriguez is one who was trying to explain to people what it'll mean if they do not cooperate with the census. So there was a lot of fear. There were a lot of people thinking that because they were not documented with it. I mean, there was just a lot of things that I don't think got out the right message, that you're looking to have a change for 10 years. So, I heard someone make the remark that people talked a lot about the bakery, but they didn't just talk about the brownie. People don't want to hear about the bakery, that you just tell them, this is what this will mean. If you don't do this, you won't have any brownies. So I really like that suggestion. I think it was Jordan, I believe, who, I apologize if I'm not saying right, who said it, but I would think that maybe as a follow-up with this perhaps opportunity for Claire Cronin, that we could get some sort of outside help just to, you know, have some things happen. I know it's hard because it might have to be by Zoom, you know, it's still kind of iffy about the in-person, but just keep in mind that we recognize it, but it's just how to put the wind in those sails. That's what an issue is.
So I want to, it's hard for me to say Jacqueline because it's, you know, it's like my auntie. But on that point, I do think, you know, the other thing about Brockton is that there are a lot of, it's got a very strong traditional Black civic community, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity there from an institutional standpoint. I think what I've seen and that's missing, to your point, is that connection now with the progressive community, right? And so we need to be intentional about making those connections. And I'm sure that following this call, we'll make sure that that happens. And not to mention, there are a number of progressive leaders already on the ground in Brockton. You know, Rasan, who's on the call, Rasan is in Brockton. Michael Curry, my predecessor, is in Brockton.
And I teased them both about being bedroom Brocktonians. I met Rasan, and Rasan, if you don't mind me saying, Rasan said the pandemic actually helped him to kind of get to know his neighborhood a little better. He couldn't get on that train and go in, so he kind of walked around, you know. So I definitely agree. So that bridge with the progressives, that's that opportunity, Tanisha. You are so right. That is that opportunity.
We'll make that.
And people are in place. They are in place.
Annabelle, you want to share some Brockton wisdom? No pressure.
Announce a campaign or something. What? Did I say anything? Sorry. Didn't realize I was off.
Or you're on mute if you want to say something. Oh, you can't. Okay, no worries. I have a question for, if we don't have any others, but please feel free to come off mute. We're at 8:30, but I have one last question. No problem. I think Jordan, I can't remember who else has been part of the process 10 years ago. I'm just kind of curious if you could compare, just as a closing remark, you know, how would you sort of compare the two? Have we been more successful, even given all the constraints? Curious.
Yeah, in one sense, we lost something because of COVID. You know, I remember there was just more people involved, more regular folks involved. I learned a lot 10 years ago just about communities, because people would say, oh, you know, we walked down this place, or, oh, you know, this, you know, they use landmarks and it was really helpful. And I think it, you know, again, it's really weird for me to say positive things about state legislators, because I think mostly they're terrible at their jobs. So I just like, it's weird to say positive things. So I'll just say that I thought Moran did a good job of capturing 10 years ago what people were saying about like individually, and we just had a little bit of that, but we didn't have a lot of that because of Zoom. And I think we lost some texture of being in places. You know, 10 years ago, Mass Vote and other groups on the ground, it wasn't just that like people magically appeared. They were, because we were able to be local. You know, I was door knocking in communities I didn't know, trying to get people to a redistricting, and people showed up and they had interest and they were included in that process. And we just didn't have that this time around. That being said, I think the positive side, I don't think there's a state in the country that had access to their redistricting process that we have had access to. Like, we can all, I think we can and should push the legislature to do as much as possible in giving people of color a fair say and having representation. And I don't know anybody else that has much access that we've had to this process. Like, they have been consistently talking to us, consistently asking questions, consistently in communications. You know, if you would allow him, Brownsburger would spend an hour talking about small districts. And he, you know, there's a public housing community that has never been with other people of color. And he put it in the state Senate because I talked to him about it. I had somebody who lives in that community in public housing. Like, I was like, I'll give you a text, and he called that person. Like, he's, I have lots of complaints, so I don't want to like oversell it, but I do think that's been different and really good. And I think a credit to them on those pieces. And I think 10 years ago, there was definitely attempts to get rid of people they didn't like Denise Andrews. And so they created dumb districts because of it. 10 years ago, because re-precincting went first, I saw Milton make explicitly racist decisions with its re-precincting that then the redistricting had to try to fix, but they were then stuck behind the racism of the localities. Worcester made racist decisions, other cities made racist decisions, and you had to draw districts based on those new re-precincts. Having this process go first allows the legislature to use block data, which allows us to do a better job of making sure people of color have a say. So, pluses and minuses from 10 years ago, but the biggest for me is just, I think you cannot replace the texture of human beings who live in a place telling you about their place. Yeah. You cannot replace it. And there are places that are 2 blocks from me that I learned about. Like, you just can't. I walk by, I see it all the time, but just having people be like, oh, I do this there or do that there. I'm like, oh yeah, I walked by that and now I know, right? Like, you just can't replace it.
Yeah. Go ahead, but was somebody else going to say something? Okay, there was one question we didn't answer, which was about a redistricting commission, an independent redistricting commission. Is that a goal? Is that a priority that any of you guys have as leaders in having gone through this process at least once?
So I guess I'll make the extremist point and then other people can mollify my point. So I hate redistricting commissions. I think they're the epitome of white liberalism. The idea that like you can just, people will just appear without bias, magically bestowed upon us from the goodness of their whiteness to just help us draw lines without any bias is just so stupid. And we have a history of institutions that are unaccountable to people that then get corrupted by people who have nothing but time and nothing but power and nothing but energy corrupting it. Anything that does not have direct representation with small d democracy, not 10 people for 100,000 or 3,000 people, but direct ability to have a say on that process will be corrupted. It will be corrupted, and it'll be corrupted for white people, for powerful people, and for old people. Only people over 65 will have any idea what's happening. That's sort of already happening with redistricting, but there is no shot with a redistrict. They're not going to put a young person, 18-year-old, on a redistricting commission. And so I hate it. I think it's the epitome of white liberalism. We just this idea that you can have undemocratic institutions who will bestow upon us our best interest is crap. And I have no patience for it. And that's anyway, that's how I feel about it.
Over time, I've found Jordan Berg Powers to be very persuasive on this and many other things. I mean, at the end of the day, it is about people having a say, and I think that people have more of a say with elected representatives than with a technocratic appointed group. And then you just look at what's happening in Colorado with the bipartisan commission, and it's just it's a disaster. It's a total disaster. And so they are squandering big opportunities to make the Colorado congressional seats more representative of where the state is going, but instead they have this 4-4 map that is totally inexplicable based off of what's happening in Colorado. And so while it sounds like a really nice technocratic idea, it is actually, I think, better to have greater power and access to the decision makers on redistricting, no matter how kind of wacky sometimes their ideas are, than to kind of cede it to some faceless people who are going to take care of it.
First of all, hi Ella. I guess what I would say is the commissions are maybe more okay in places that have Republicans running everything. Like a commission in Wisconsin, great, because Wisconsin is incredibly gerrymander. In Massachusetts, I would rather strengthen our redistricting laws so that the VRA is not the ceiling but the floor. Let's codify that we should not need to have 50% plus one CVAP in order to create a district. Let's codify coalition districts into our state law so that we actually can force them to do it in the way that they have done things where they're mandated, right? Because when something is mandated, it doesn't say anything about whether the legislator is good or not on the issue, because they're mandated. Like Donald Trump would have to do it, right? Like when you have a choice is when you can actually see if somebody is actually good on the issue and actually care about people of color. And what we're seeing is that some legislators choose not to care.
Okay.
Yeah. So the only thing I will say, I cannot pass up this opportunity to double click on one of the many brilliant things that Jordan shared. And that is about appointed versus elected representation. I can't pass the opportunity up, right? And so anytime we have the opportunity to create structures in our democracy that are centered on the vote of the people, the voice of the people, are, in my opinion, always better. And so in that respect, when there is an opportunity like Roberto shared, for us to look at ways to reform the system that currently exists while not disrupting the voice of the people from an elected standpoint, I'm in favor of that, which is why I will also just make sure folks know about our little question here in Boston. Question 3, elect the Boston School Committee, vote yes on 3.
And on that note, because Ella also gave us a signal that she wants her dad back, we are going to close out, and thank you all so much for your time. And you guys are a brilliant panel. I could have kept going, and thank you for walking us through the maps and for all the work, Roberto, you did on the back end, creating those maps and turning them around so quickly. John, do we have all of the participants? We can send out a bunch of the links that you guys can follow up.
Yeah, can do.
I just put them in the chat for anybody who's still here, but we'll send them out as well.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. And